Can everyone hear me?
No.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. I met Leah a dozen years ago when we both wrote for a now defunct writing site. Some of us knew quality when we read it and remained friends. I met her and Bill in this, real life, not online, a few years later when I hosted a writing retreat at Mohawk Mountain House in New York. Leah is a delight, as many of you know. In Kansas, where I grew up, we called the best things pure D. Don't ask. As in pure D sky, or pure D wonder. Working with Leah, selecting from her photos, sorting out the media and the style, was a pure delight. I have movement disorders, and I stopped pursuing illustration work about 8 years ago. I'm so glad she talked me into this assignment. I found new ways to do what I do, and I'm immensely grateful to her for that. We never lost an opportunity as we worked together for joy. When results merited it, we both knew when things occasionally weren't quite right too. Her aesthetics are first rate. She gave me artistic freedom, and that's rare. Generous to me during a difficult year personally, I am proud to have brought her superb writing to visual life, and even prouder to call her my friend.
Well, as you can see, Greg is very talented. He's talented not only as an illustrator, but as a writer. He's won many awards in both. And I'm sure you'll see more of his work after this, now that you know his name, follow him. The illustrations, by the way, I just wanted to point out, this is a book signing, but it's also illustrations over there if you'd like to see them. We have put them in fine art form, and they're prints, and if anyone is interested in any illustrations in this book, it'll take 4 to 6 weeks, and Greg will do them with archive paper, signed, the whole thing. There's some samples over there. They're beautiful. And 10% of the profit is going to go to Human Rights Watch. Some of you are familiar with that organization. It helps people in 100 countries dealing with human rights difficulties of all kinds. It's a wonderful organization. They happen to be having a dinner March 4th, and you can get to them. I think it's HR Human Rights Watch, hrw.org, to find out more. But I'm very proud to be a part of that. The book, okay. Places I remember. When you get to my age, there are a lot of places you can remember. And looking back is a lovely thing to do in times of stress, which I think these are. It's a beautiful thing to remember. Nice things, funny things, happy things, poignant things. I think they're all in this book. It's a mix. I go from A to Z, start with Andorra and with Zimbabwe. And there are many vignettes. Some of the chapters, some of the countries have 4 or 5 vignettes, some have maybe 1. It depends. You can be laughing, you can be maybe having some tears, it depends. So what I'm going to do in the reading today is just go through some of them, give you some little samples. I'm not going to really go through a whole, too many of the whole country, just bits so you can get an idea of the book. And very often there's a photo. There are 70 photos, over 70 photos in the book that have been illustrated by Greg. So it adds to the experience. So I'll just start. I'll start with Australia. And this is just an example of, there's information in this book. It isn't just about me or a memoir about me. There's lots of information. So I'll just give you a sample of some of the information I'm interested in. For example, Australia is home to 21 of the world's 25 most venomous snakes. Everyone doesn't know that. It would take around 30 years to visit one new beach every day. There are about 11,000 of them in Australia. Aussies drink about 680 bottles of beer a year for adults. When they crave a bottle, they sometimes say, "I'm dry as a dead dingo's dunga." Would you know that in most guidebooks? No, this is not a guidebook. Here's some animal trivia. 1 million camels roam wild in Australia's deserts, the largest number of purebred camels in the world. Australia actually exports them to the Middle East. Yeah. Australians are the only people in the world who actually eat their national emblem, choosing from among 60 types of kangaroos. The meat is considered leaner, healthier than beef. And perhaps my favorite odd fact, which makes some sense when you think about it, the first police force in Australia was made up of the most well-behaved convicts. So that's one sample. You get a little information as well as information about me. Here's something from Belize. I'm just going to go alphabetically. I'm skipping around, but Belize. And I talk about massage. One of the perks of traveling the world for over 50 years has been experiencing spa treatments based on local products. My body has been covered with, among other things, mushrooms, olive oil, seaweed, honey, dirt, hot rocks, crystals, jasmine, chocolate, gold leaf, seawater, oatmeal, mud, maple syrup, acorns, sea salt and pink salt, pineapple, and whale sperm. And that's only a partial list. All at one time. I've been rubbed, massaged, abraded, twisted, pummeled, sauteed. See Finland, I have a little note to see. It's really saunted, but it's really like being sauteed. Loofed, hosed, pinched, soaked, creamed, bathed, steamed, plucked, vibrated, waxed, doused, tweezed, lasered, peeled, buffed, bronzed, brined, tanned, and kneaded. That's just a sampling. In Mexico, I luxuriated in a midnight moon massage by the Caribbean. In a wellness clinic in Chile, the cubicle smelled of antiseptic as I was stretched like taffy. In Japan, a woman, or man, I never figured out which, and didn't much care, stepped all over my back. In Baden-Baden, Germany, I soaked in thermal springs. And don't think I'm not patriotic. At the homestead in Virginia, I was hosed as if I were a 4-alarm fire, and then I dog paddled in a paper bathing suit in the same enclosed pool where Jefferson once swam, I hope not in a paper Speedo. And in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, where Washington himself presumably soaked between battles, presiding over an infant country and tooth sandy, I stepped into a steam box that looked like a freezer with only my head sticking out, and emerged looking like a tomato with a white stem. You get the point. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are 100 countries here. I have traveled to over 100, maybe 130. I don't know, I haven't stopped counting. But I picked from 100 countries in here, so it goes from A to Z. So I'll go along here a little bit more. Let's try Botswana. Okay. I remember hippos encountered in my travels, hundreds crowded in fetid water in a river in the Ngorongoro crater of Tanzania. And in Malawi, grunting, growling hippos chomping on foliage only a few feet away from our tents as we slept. Our group at that camp was warned not to walk alone at night without an armed guard. When a hippo gets hyper, there is no more dangerous animal. I follow instructions in distant places, especially when I'm alone. So even though the guard who was supposed to accompany me to dinner was already a half hour late, I waited as instructed in my tent, growls emerging, not from wild animals in the distance, but from my stomach. It was getting dark, and when the armed guard had not come to fetch me, I peeked out. I couldn't see anyone except a woman gardening in the distance. All was quiet, and I decided that since the boma, the open area where dinner is served, was only 2 minutes away, I could walk myself this one time. So I took a chance, following my hungry gut rather than my cautionary head, and ventured out briskly. I came closer to the heavy-set woman in the distance who was still bent over. Then I stopped suddenly, realizing that a woman wasn't leaning over to garden. It was a hippo eating the garden. A hippo, not a hippie woman. I ran like a cartoon character, faster than I probably had before, or certainly have since, into the closest tent where 2 other women huddled who had also not been accompanied to dinner and who had also seen the gardening hippo. Our absence was eventually noticed, and a guard finally came to escort us to a very late meal. And we were accompanied from then on. Thank you very much. Okay. Let's see. That one. We'll go on to picking as I go. Let's do France. I'll do just a little bit about something that's very sad, really. If the Eiffel Tower is France's spirit, Notre Dame has been France's soul. The first image of Lord Kenneth Clarke's famed British series Civilization was Notre Dame. I'm not sure how to define civilization, he said, standing in front of the cathedral, but I'm looking at it now. For my favorite hotel on the left bank, I could easily walk to Notre Dame, gray by day, luminous at night. One rainy twilight, I brought a friend who had never been in Paris, and she took photos of the light-washed stone facade reflected in the puddles. I enjoyed visiting the gigantic north rose window on sunny days when colors streamed into the cathedral like multiple rainbows. And I remember an extraordinary Christmas concert under Notre Dame's glowing stained glass, with voices soaring high into a Gothic arch. Before the 2019 fire, tourists visited the spiritual citadel towering above the Seine more than any of the many masterpieces of Paris. Like Shakespeare's works or the music of Bach, Notre Dame represents humanity's ability to create beauty. Even more, it is a symbol of collaborative art. And now it reminds us hauntingly that our own beautiful works, along with Earth itself, are precious and fragile. Okay, let's see. Somebody kind of recognize this one in here. This is Greece. Lodging also played a big part. 2 years later, I go on from something else. As I said, these are vignettes. There's more to each country, but I'm giving you bits and pieces. I waited until the last minute to book a hotel on the island of Limnos because I figured I would easily find a room, but I wasn't aware that I had arrived a week before the hotels were opening for the season. After calling around, I found one hotel that was willing to let me be the sole occupant besides the maids and skeleton crew. I slept well, breakfasted on yogurt, honey, and walnuts in the hotel's huge, empty stainless steel kitchen, and let myself in at night. At times I felt I was in The Shining, but without Jack Nicholson around the corner, and with the blue Aegean beyond. I will never forget the place, although I have stayed in far better lodgings. Never before or since have I run around hotel halls in my bra and panties, singing Tom Petty songs as loud as I want. Okay. This is a little elegy on islands. It comes under Guadeloupe. I'm thinking about Les Saints. Small islands can provide, there's a little group of islands called Les Saints. They're very French. They're near Guadeloupe. But like Les Saints, small islands can provide powerful memories. At the phosphorescent bay on Vieques Island near Puerto Rico, the stars above seem to fall into the water. I flew there on a small plane from a resort community called Palmas del Mar in Puerto Rico. We have residents. Charles Frazier, the developer of Hilton Head, Amelia Island, and Kiowa Island, had read my first travel piece in a magazine almost 50 years ago and invited me to visit the resort. On Little Montserrat, in the Caribbean, locals speak with an Irish brogue. With a strong sense of Irish heritage, Montserrat is also the only country outside of Ireland where St. Patrick's Day is a public holiday. My guide there, who sounded as if he were from Dublin, taught Sting to windsurf. And yes, when he proudly displayed a Sting song for me, he smiled when he heard his name mentioned in it. Elton John also recorded music in Montserrat, but I see him more surfing channels than wind. I remember the craggy mountains, dense forests, and remote beaches of Corsica, the French island in the Med where Napoleon was born. And the nearby Italian island of Elba, not far away in the Tyrrhenian Sea, where he was exiled for a year. And then there are the archipelagos, clusters of delight, the green San Juan Islands outside of Seattle, green and gray mist, sunny ferrying through the Finnish archipelago, the Thousand Islands in northern New York State near Canada, where the rich of the Gilded Age built summer homes on private islands to escape the heat. In Nicaragua, too, hundreds of houses built as getaways on tiny, lush islands. I remember Flintstone-looking granite boulders tumbled on the beaches of the Seychelles, with huge turtles camouflaged in the crevices. Also in the Indian Ocean, the clear waters of the Maldives, where I snorkeled in late afternoon light. And in Southeast Asia, the pretty, mainly undiscovered Philippine islands, including the Palawan archipelago of nearly 2,000 islands. Here there are secret lagoons in one of the longest underground rivers in the world, 5 miles through karsts and natural rock formations. As beautiful as the islands off Thailand's coast, but less crowded. On in reverie, the outer islands of Malta, the varied isles of Greece and Madagascar, the Pearl Islands of Panama, the Galapagos. Others I return to, more than enough to remember sweetly for the rest of my days. Okay, now we're going to get to some kind of an incident that I will never forget. This is a place I remember very well. It's under Honduras. This sometimes happened when I was writing this. I'd write about Honduras and then I'd think, wait a minute, I remember something that happened somewhere else. And I put it under Honduras because it related to it. You'll find that too here. You never know what you're going to find. So anyway, this is under Honduras, but it's in the Amazon in Peru. The Honduran native show reminded me of another dance experience that I talked about. It wasn't a typical production that I will never forget. On a day trip with a press group, hacking our way through vines and ant-infested foliage to visit a tribal village along an Amazon tributary in Peru, word was that a nice lady from Connecticut recently visited this tribe with a tour group and was hit in the hand with a poisoned blow dart because she hadn't been sufficiently respectful to the chief. Should she have curtsied, offered a fist pump, said chief, like you say chef? Our group spent quite a while discussing whether this awful poison dart event could be repeated, but taking no chances, we agreed that we would be extra respectful. The male-dominated tribe seemed to notice our deference, as they immediately started beating drums and demanding that we run around a pole in the middle of the hut. Then they placed a large rodent that looked like a blown-up rat in the hands of one unlucky member of our group, and the rest of us were grateful just to run around the pole as many times as they asked, sans rodent. We were most afraid that the chief would have us pass it around like a football. And then what else would he want us to do? The indigenous group began chanting faster and faster, so we increased our speed, and I became out of breath, running in endless circles around this pole. After several minutes, the man holding the rodent had the sense to gasp a request for us to present our gifts. Thankfully, the chief nodded. We dug into our packbacks, but the tribe did not seem impressed with our assortment of sunglasses, lipsticks, t-shirts, and other trinkets, except for one offering. The chief himself came forward to acknowledge a man who had brought a present grabbed from his wife's drawer as a joke for the tribe that had everything. A pair of lightly used control panties. The chief looked annoyed. He pulled on the panties like a slingshot. And then, as we waited anxiously for the poison blowdart to appear, he smiled and put the panties on his head. After that, the mood changed, and the chief showed off his storage area filled with other gifts left by nervous tourists, including dozens of teas with sayings like, "I love New York." When we left, thankfully unhurt, the Amazonians probably got comfortable in their jeans and tees, joking about our stupidity and bad taste. These all happen, folks. Okay, I'll mention, since we have a lot of Miami Beach high graduates here, I'm going to just mention something about Miami Beach. It's very short here, but and my sister's here too. My younger brother and sister and I were brought up in a secular household where we displayed a small Christmas tree even though we were Jewish. But I was a curious girl who wanted to explore my religion, so I attended classes in the nearby Reform Temple. The country of Israel had been born only 6 years after I was, and it felt to me like another younger sibling that needed attention and care. I gave allowance money every week to go toward a tree fund that our class presented to the Israeli government at the end of the year. When I was in my 20s, I visited Israel for the first time and was amazed at Jerusalem, modern Tel Aviv, and the beauty of Old Jaffa with its ancient alleys. Desert and sandy scrub covered most of the country, and I remember my tree and wondered if it were growing somewhere out there, but there was no way to know. I thought of that question regarding observation and perception. If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? When I returned 40 years later, Israel was carpeted in green. All those trees donated by kids in Sunday school had now grown tall and helped forest the hills, a lesson in patience. And so I planted another evergreen, this time myself, in a grove of baby trees. I dug a hole and placed the tree carefully into the ground, patted the earth around it, and watered it lovingly. Long after I am gone, this tree will stand tall to shade and cool Israel, just as my first tree has. Small plantings do become big forests. Let's see. Let's talk about, this is an interesting thing. This comes under Italy. I have lots of vignettes for Italy. There are many countries that have many, many vignettes because they're great countries and I've been many times. This is just one little one. When I traveled to Europe in the 1960s, 20 years after the Marshall Plan, and just before the Vietnam War, Americans were particularly beloved. And in parts of Europe where Americans liberated the population in wartime, we are still respected today. But bad politics and bad people can ruin things. Right after 9/11, along with a few others, I was a special guest at Florence, Italy, representing New York City. We were symbols of 8 million inhabitants, a deputy mayor, a city worker, a serviceman, an artist, an actor, and so on. I was the writer. Florence flew us in and put us up at a grand hotel on the Arno. We were hosted at the townhouse of the shoe magnate Ferragamo's and driven to the birthplace in Tuscany of Giovanni Verrazzano, the first European to explore the Atlantic coast of North America. The locals were so proud that New York City had named a bridge after him. The city opened the Pitti Palace at night just for us, and the mayor cried as he said, "We love America, we are you." That was a moment. They felt our pain. The world no longer feels it. Many feel us a pain, and some even wish us pain. You know, time changes things. This is Jordan. Very short. Petra in Jordan, hidden to the Western world from about the 14th century until the early 19th, takes some effort to get to. I crossed the border from Eilat, Israel, to Aqaba, a popular Red Sea port, then rode a bus for a couple of hours through sandy scrub, passing shepherds with their flocks at the times of Jesus and Mohammed. I could have overnighted in the desert, trekked on a camel, or taken a four-wheel drive excursion at Wadi Rum, the Valley of Romans. But I went ahead, stopping only at the mountain village of Wadi Musa, the Valley of Moses. The choice is then to walk or take a donkey or horse-drawn carriage almost a mile through a narrow canyon. Traders with precious frankincense, myrrh, and spices did exactly this thousands of years before. I walked slowly in the shade of the canyon, and when it finally widened, there stood the treasury of Petra, almost 150 feet high, carved into limestone cliffs. As I walked into antiquity, the rock carvings and tombs turned reddish in the late afternoon sun. This has to be one of the greatest entrances on earth. I don't know if it's up there, but I have a picture here of it. There's a beautiful picture in the book of the entrance. Okay, let's see. This is cute. It's very short. It's the whole thing about this country. Sometimes the country just has one short little X. I just remember one thing. This is what I remember about Malawi. I was in Malawi in 2004 with a group of journalists. We visited Lake Malawi and held some meetings with government officials to help them with their tourism industry, which was minimal because of poverty and the scourge of AIDS, which had hit this African country hard. You need more directional signs on your roads, I offered. We had many signs, said the officials, but people stole them to make shelter. Tough realities. So I hardly expected the sweet surprise of the following night, a short tale befitting the duration of the experience. A Malawi dance group was performing at an official function. A man in white asked me to join in the ceremonial dance. I was reluctant, but threw off my shoes, joined the man, and moved with him as best I could to throbbing African drum beats. The dancer gestured. I gestured. He sat me down and danced around me for a few minutes, waving his hands above his head, and I remained seated, but copied his hand movements. This went on for several minutes, waving and tapping my feet, mirroring his hands as he whirled. Suddenly, everyone clapped and laughed. It was the end of the dance, so I stumbled exhausted to a group of people standing on the sidelines the whole time, with big smiles on their faces. What's so funny, I asked. I knew I wasn't much of a dancer, but still. Oh, an official said, your new name is Ngunda. You two dance very well together. You two are now married. My fourth husband. And the title of this little Malawi is He Never Calls, He Never Writes. And it was a good dance. You never know, right? Okay, let's see. What should we do? This is interesting. I know many of you love art. So this is under Mexico. Again, it makes Mexico, I was thinking of something about Frida Kahlo's garden and her house, Casa Azul, so it made me think of other things, so I'll just read the other things. Thinking of Casa Azul, I remember other artist studios and residences I've been privileged to visit, among them Rembrandt's mansion on an Amsterdam canal, and Van Gogh's bare room in Arles, and his asylum room in nearby Saint-Remy. At Jackson Pollock's working shed on his Long Island property, when the docent went to take a call, I was left alone on a floor swirled with his paint drippings, and I felt as if I were in a cathedral. Outside Winslow Homer's studio in Maine, I traipsed along the rocky shore he so often painted. In Paris, I walked through Picasso's studio, and at Rodin's house, I paused at the Thinker and thought a bit more than usual. In Tangier, I tipped the doorman to stand by the hotel window where Matisse painted a famed scene of a marketplace and see that remains much the same 100 years later. In Cézanne's atelier in Aix-en-Provence, the cards used by the players in his famed painting are displayed on an original table. His hat and coat hang on a stand. An iconic Saint-Victoire, the mountain he painted time after time, looms through the window. All of these visits have increased my appreciation and understanding of these artists and art and enriched my life. Okay, let's see, a couple more. Just picking and choosing. Well, this one, this one is not for vegetarians, so I read it anyway. A well-known, this is New Zealand, a well-known Maori chef and I foraged for mushrooms and herbs, and he hooked some eels from a river, preparing them with fern fronds and Maori bush pepper, bush basil, and potato. He pointed out flowering plants and parrots, chubby cockapoos, and sharp-beaked keas, which he explained were strong enough to attack sheep and yank rubber parts off cars. After lunch, we dallied by a thermal spring, and he took my photo. The chef told stories of his grandfather teaching him haka, an ancient Maori war dance used on the battlefield. It's a display of pride, strength, and unity, he explained. We stamp our feet, stick out our tongues, and slap ourselves while we chant. I've taken part in haka at weddings. A war dance at a wedding? Yes, he said, our tradition. And then he told me of an even stranger one. When his great-grandfather, a Maori chieftain, had warred with his rivals, After one major battle, he had eaten the rival chief. Your great-grandfather ate him? He was honoring him, taking in the spirit of his foe. The act was fierce and respectful. It's been our tradition until the beginning of the 20th century. And then the chef paused and looked me in the eyes. He told my grandfather that people taste like pork. Words failed. They still fail. I thought for a second about dietary restrictions, but no, silence. Later, as we rubbed noses, the Maori custom for saying goodbye, I couldn't help but wonder if the chef got into the food business subconsciously in the spirit of his ancestors. That's that. Very interesting as you go on and you travel. You never know. Here's one from England. I have many from England. This is just one little one. It's under United Kingdom. That's why it's U. It's near the end. It's England. Well, I put several under that category. I slept in beds from a hammock in a farm shed to a super king in a presidential suite overlooking a private indoor pool in a Milan penthouse for research purposes only. But the most historic bed was Queen Elizabeth's, the red-haired original one, not the one who carries a purse. As a girl, Liz I had been locked up in this inn for some historical reason, so to keep her from becoming queen. A window retained a message she had scratched into a pane with her ring, something to the effect of, "Let me out of here," in Elizabethan style, although it wasn't yet called that when she etched it, of course. Others on the press strip were staying in normal rooms in the inn, but I had won the room lottery to stay in the Queen's Queen, canopied with carved oak posts. And I was feeling truly royal vibes as I was about to retire for the evening, until the innkeeper said, "You know who else slept in that bed?" I thought, Mary Queen of Scots, Charles I, George III, Robin Williams. The idea of Queen Elizabeth I, the late great comedian Robin Williams, and I sharing the same bed, even at different times, was too much, even for me. The dreams alone had me tossing and turning most of the night. There was a threesome of me under the covers in my usual oversized tee, the young future Queen of England from yore, in a prim gown, and a hairy-armed court jester with a cap on his head. And my most frequent thought as I tried to sleep, when had they last changed the mattress? Too much of a good thing. And whilst two's company, three's a crowd may apply here only in terms of haunting, I was exhausted the whole next day from sleeping with the images of those famed bedmates, and would have been better off in a standard double by myself in a non-historic bedroom with no famous ghosts. Okay. I can read you two. Well, almost finished. Do we have the picture of the United States, the canyon? Yeah. Okay. This is called Looking Up into the Light and Dark, but I'll just read a little. That's a photo. Antelope Canyon in Arizona is among the most exquisite and rare creations on Earth, plunging over 100 feet to the desert floor from its open rim. Water and wind have scoured into shapes and colors beyond imagination. Hollows stacked on hollows climb to many stories, a magical, mystical cathedral of rock. The light in this slot canyon is best for a short time at midday, when the sun pours in and the sandstone striations become almost incandescent. But the day of my visit, my alarm didn't go off, and I overslept. My annoyed fellow travelers were impatiently waiting in the van. The driver sped us past ravines, towering saguaro cactus, and dry scrub along the sparsely beautiful Navajo land. We skipped the requisite stop for turquoise trinkets and woven rugs, as photographers were still worried that we might miss the noon light. We arrived at the town of Page and jeeped with our Navajo guide to an unassuming formation in the desert. He explained that the beauty of the Slot Canyon lies deceptively within the rock. Over time, water from a nearby creek cracked through the sandstone as it swirled in, hollows appeared, and softer material washed away. Flash floods may pour in before there's time to escape, and hikers have drowned at Antelope. But this day was sunny, and we had traveled far for these precious moments within the canyon. The only danger was missing the midday light. We anxiously squeezed into an opening, single file. I gasped and aimed my point-and-shoot camera to capture the surreal world. around me. Sunlight poured from above like a waterfall, reflecting sand in the air and setting the walls aglow. Looking up, warm yellow and orange deepened to red, to purple, to deep gray, to black in the shadows. Waves, curls, arches, folds, curtains and whorls dazzled me as I maneuvered into space, where lines bent up seemed down, and inside seemed out. Not an inch was less than magnificent. Yes, indeed, he had captured the light. Okay, I have one more, but I'm going to wait. I'm just going to do a little housekeeping. These are some of the photos from the book, and as I mentioned, they're available if you want to look at them. They're beautiful, and I'm very proud that we have them connected with this book. Also, there's food and there's wine outside after this, so I hope you'll join us for that. And I think I have, is there anything else I should read? Oh, book signing. If anyone wants to buy the book, I'll be signing it if you want the book. I think you'll enjoy it. It's a little bit of everything and a lot of heart, and I hope it comes through. So, anything else I missed? Yeah. Q&A, a little Q&A? Okay, how about some? I'm going to read one more after, but I'll take some. Yeah.
So, where are you living now? And what is your reflections on South Florida in January, February, and March? And where do you recommend, what's your best recommendation for July, August, and September?
Oh my gosh. How about the stock market? You want me to pick for that?
No.
Okay, where am I living now? I'm living in Miami. I lived in New York for 30-something years. I left, I've lived in many places, England and Philippines and Thailand and places like that, but I lived in New York for most of my adult life, came back in 2001, and I'm still living here. I think it's fantastic in January, February, March. Is that what you asked me? I think it's superb. It's now a world city. When I left, it was not a world city. It was a very nice, sun and fun city, but now it's a world city and a great cultural mecca, and it's great. Where do I like in what time of year? June, July, and August, anywhere but here. No, actually it's not bad here. It's better here with the breezes, especially if you're on the bay, which I am. It's not bad. Where do you think? I mean, many of you have traveled all over the place. I know
Aspen,
that.
Colorado. June,
Where?
July, and
Colorado,
August.
yeah.
Aspen, Colorado.
Perfect.
Jazz Fest,
North
Food and Wine
Carolina.
Festival,
Aspen.
Music Festival,
I think
theater.
mountains are a nice contrast to Florida, obviously. But I think it's wonderful to travel all over the place. I think you can go out there too and just try to avoid the crowds. That's the problem nowadays. The most beautiful places are so crowded. The one thing you can do is go off season, or you can go very early in the morning or very late in the day. Just try to avoid them if you can. It's not so easy. Yeah.
How many days did you stay in the place that you live? It seems like you're always traveling.
I'm old. I've had time.
We
I'm
went
not.
to school together. You know all of the
Yeah.
girls that are here. Dennis, we all.
Yeah, we have a whole bunch of Miami
Right.
Beach High School
I
classes.
just was curious. It seems like you are always on the road, always away.
Well, I do this. I'm a travel writer, so this is what I do for a living. I don't do it as much as I used to. When I was divorced, I had no plant, no pet. My kids were in college. I could go all the time. Now it's not so. I'm married, and I take my husband when I can, but I don't go that much. But if you travel steadily, it adds up. I think if most of you add up your country, some of you may have lots and lots of them. I don't travel all the time. I travel much of the time. I think I'm traveling less and less, and I'm finding that many places in America are fascinating, little towns, little areas. I'm interested in, for example, going to Door County, Wisconsin. I don't know, it just appeals to me. I want to go there. Some of you may have been. Just sometimes something just catches my interest. Just charm here. But did you ask me something about what?
I was also curious if you went on tours.
Oh, I've gone every way you can think of. I've gone alone a lot. I wrote a book, Solo Traveler, some of you know, in 2005 because I've traveled so many places, including Antarctica, by myself. I was on a ship. I wasn't walking, but I was on my own. And but I've traveled, every way you can think of. I like every way, and I like traveling by myself as well. I find it Any comments about your job?
Leah, Leah, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful experiences. But I do have a question for you. Do you have a place you would not go back? Is there one place after all this 150 places?
Well, I recently went to Myanmar, and it's gorgeous, but knowing what's going on there, I wouldn't go back there until it changes. There's a lot of problems about the Rohingya people, and I didn't realize it when I was going, so I was very lucky to have seen it, but I would not go back to a place where there's that kind of oppression. Things change, it'll get better, I hope. I've never been to Saudi Arabia and don't intend to. I was invited, by the way, but I turned it down. I've been to Russia.
Let me ask you the same question inverted. Do you have a favorite place?
Yes. I get asked that a lot. I'm very Eurocentric. I love Italy, Spain, France. I love Morocco. I love New Zealand. I think Antarctica, as I mentioned, is something very special. One time, it was like I was in someone else's realm. I didn't feel it was my place. It was nature's place and the animals' place, and it's going away. So it's it's melting. So it's just going. Greenland is very interesting as well. Almost any place. I can find. All of us, I think, can find good things where we go. If you kind of take the time to think and work it out.
I'm curious to know why you were invited to Saudi Arabia.
A lady who is a new PR person for Saudi Arabia. They're starting a tourism push, and a lot of people, a lot of influencers, the people who do the blogs and go. They don't write about it, but they stand in front of something. A lot of them were going. She wanted to get some travel writers to go, and I knew her, and I was invited to be one of the first to go, and thought about it because it is fascinating. There's lots of stuff there that no one even knows about. Wonderful stuff, but didn't want to go. There were lots of reasons, but no, I'm not comfortable. If you're comfortable going somewhere, you know it, and if you're not comfortable, for whatever reason, there are plenty of other places. You don't have to force yourself to go somewhere. Fascinating. I was there in 1970s. My son is here. He was there too, when he was about 4, 2, 3. I don't remember. He remembers mud. Yeah. Nobody was there in 1970. It was like the moon. There was a flight many of you may have known. It was going to Luxembourg, and they let you stop in Iceland for free. Nobody wanted to go there. I thought it was icy, and it's green. Of course, on Greenland it was icy, but we stayed for I think 3 or 4 days free, and it was fascinating. I thought it was the moon. And coming back, of course, it's now so crowded with people and so popular, and everyone's going there. And I think they had to close one of the canyons. I wrote that Justin Bieber did a video there, so now it's one of those places everybody goes, and that's what happens. Everyone is now flocking to the place of the moment. Iceland has been. I don't know what is now. I think Morocco's very hot. Where else? Certain place. Porto in Portugal. It's gorgeous, but it's crowded. To get into this beautiful bookstore, Lello. I don't know if any of you have been there. It's a gorgeous place. You have to get a ticket. Like going into Books and Books, you have to get a ticket. And people don't buy a book. They just want to take a photograph by the staircase.
Did you get the letters in transit?
Right, that's Britain, right?
No, that's
Casablanca.
You were a young woman.
What? She's very young.
Very, very, very young
Thank
woman.
you.
And you imagined traveling and fulfilling your dreams. What was your idea of the world, and what did you want to accomplish?
Oh my. I was always a curious girl. I think my first book was Heidi. She lived in a mountain. I lived in Miami Beach. Can you imagine? Oh my goodness. I read Holiday Magazine when I was 10. Remember Holiday Magazine? Oh my, yeah. And it was just, and I didn't go really anywhere outside of the country till I was 21 on my honeymoon. I had a wonderful 2-month honeymoon where I just got fantastic. But I just am curious, and I think I love to travel. I love to write. I figured, hey, you can do this. You don't make a lot of money, but boy, do you have a great life. I'm very blessed by it, and I've done a lot of travel at different times, but now I'm doing just travel I want to do, and it's sometimes quirky travel, and or returning somewhere I love. I think you don't have to go far. You can just go back to where you love, the time you had there, or you just go close to home, where you like. But it's broadened me. I think anyone who gets out of this country or wherever they live gets to see that we're all the same, but we're all fascinating, and it's wonderful to know that. It helps. Anything else? Shall I read one last piece? I'll read the last piece of the book, and then we can go eat and drink, okay? And listen to Alex play the guitar. Okay, this is Zimbabwe. It's the last piece in the book. It's also the cover of the book, so it's a nice place to end. And I'm going to read the whole thing. It's not that long, but this gives you an idea of more, not just a little vignette, but this piece is typical. It's got a little bit of a lot of stuff. Let's see. It's called White Falls, Gold River, Red Teeth. The Zambezi River teems with catfish, crocodiles, and hippos. It creates a border between Zimbabwe and Zambia. It drops over 350 feet, twice the height of Niagara, as the massive precipice the world knows as Victoria Falls. Bill and I, Bill's my husband, as we know, Bill and I purchased visas to visit both countries, and also nearby Chobe National Park in Botswana. On this trip, I got pretty confused about just where I was, which sometimes happens when I'm jet-lagged, even when there's only one destination. We walked to the middle of the bridge connecting Zambia and Zimbabwe to watch bungee jumpers plunge just above the river. I could see both sides of the massive falls, and that was enough for me. I figured out pretty fast that I didn't really need to view the water close up and upside down while hanging by a thread. Another adventure I skipped was at Devil's Pool, a rocky basin at the very edge of the falls on the Zambian side. You boat to a small island in the Zambezi River, then swim to a large rock before leaping into the hollow, with cascading torrents just beyond along the rocky ledge of the falls. Gutsy, stoned folks splash and of course take selfies this close to the deadly waterfall drop. The ultimate infinity pool, yes. But I was content watching the scene and then cooling off back at the hotel pool with a swimming noodle. On our last night, we took a Zambezi sunset cruise zigzagging between the two countries to pick up passengers. Zambia's riverbanks are densely packed with green bush, while Zimbabwe's plains run down to the water, palm trees stretching to the sky. Both are beautiful. The lowering sun turned the river golden, and the mist from the falls looked like low-hanging clouds in the distance. And as we got closer to the falls, we could hear louder and louder why natives call this natural wonder the smoke that thunders. Another water-related Zimbabwean adventure was riding in an open jeep on a half-day safari, and near the end getting caught in a thunderstorm. Wet giraffes loped near us, water shaking off them as they ran in the downpour, and we all got drenched under the big slate-colored African sky. Some tourists complained. I found it memorable. Our hotel was historic and grand, but our assigned room was small and had no view. An upgrade is often given at the discretion of the front desk, and they size you up and figure out if they're able or want to please you. How you present yourself matters. I must have been on point, because we were upgraded to a gargantuan suite with a balcony overlooking the white mist of Victoria Falls. In fact, the president of Zimbabwe had recently slept in the canopy bed where we would be snoring that night. We practically jumped up and down for our good fortune and chutzpah and ordered room service just to soak in the luxury. One small glitch, as there so often is. An infection in my mouth wasn't clearing up, and we asked the hotel to contact a doctor. He arrived at our lavish room in under an hour, dressed in a suit, and probably thinking we were moguls or hedge funders. He prescribed some antibiotics, and the hotel bought them and brought them up within minutes. I grabbed a dark glass bottle as instructed and gargled a few times with the solution. The strange smell was familiar from my childhood, but it was too late. Bill looked at me as if I had bitten off the head of a snake. and I saw in the mirror that my teeth were as red as blood. I looked closer at the bottle and read iodine. I remembered using iodine for cuts as a child, brushing it on with something that looked like a shoe polish dispenser. I brushed and brushed my teeth, gargled and gargled with mouthwash, but the red remained, fading from rust to pink. My teeth were not that white to begin with, but now I look like a well-fed vampire. For the rest of the trip, I covered my mouth when I laughed like one of those before people on a dental implant commercial. When I returned home, I made an immediate appointment with a cosmetic dentist who said he hadn't seen stains like that since he was a child, and those were on his arm. My teeth came out of their whitening treatment about the shade they were before. Still not bright white, but at least not able to stop traffic. That stained memory is canceled out by the gorgeous room in which the incident occurred and by witnessing Victoria Falls, the animals in the storm, and the Golden River. Travel offers ups and downs, and over so many years around this unpredictable world, I try to concentrate on the ups, learn from, and when possible, laugh at the downs. And most important of all, I keep traveling.